it is a lot better to start at 15 and continue writing for however long you want and slowly get better and better than start writing at the age of like 50 or 60 because that's what you were expecting. That was the age you were expecting to start writing at. And because even then it could still turn out bad. It's better to have practice. Being, I don't know, 65 or whatever doesn't guarantee that you're going to have the knowledge required to write a book because the idea isn't all that goes into it. It's more than that. It's about the craft. It's about creativity. It's about figurative language, whatever. Your ability to craft story arcs and worlds and exciting plot structures and things like that. It's a lot better to start now than become equally disappointed as you are now 50 years later.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. This is Living the Next Chapter. I have an author with me today, which I'm excited to talk to, who's from the other side of the pond, as we call it here. I'm in Canada. Dylan is here with me, joining me from the UK. Dylan, welcome to the podcast. One of my youngest authors I think I've ever had on the podcast. It's great to have you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Do you ever get tired of people saying that, Dylan? That you're so young, Dylan. You're so young.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. But I know that my age does play a big role in helping me get to the point that I'm at so far. I think if I was a lot older when I wrote this, I think it would have been a lot harder, to be honest.
Do you think your age opens a door then and makes people curious? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it opens me to a lot more opportunities because everyone wants to empower the youth, right? And I think, yeah.
I was just reading an article I saw about you, and they're talking about how amazing it is to see a schoolboy write a book and the response, and it's so cool to see other people recognizing your talent and your ability. When did you realize, Dylan, that writing was something that was going to be in your future? What was that moment for you?
I can't really pinpoint a specific time because I've always been into writing even since primary school. So that's I think it's middle school in America. I'm not sure. But, yeah, I've always really been into creative writing, and I've always sort of had dreams of writing a novel. But I think that when we got to quarantine, even though everyone was sort of suffering during quarantine because of the loneliness, I think for me it was the perfect opportunity to start writing because, well, there wasn't that much else to do. So, yeah, I think that quarantine definitely gave me the drive to actually start writing in a more professional sense rather than just doing it for fun.
It's amazing. So when you're walking the halls of school and you're going into like maybe a class that would talk about writing or talk about language or something at school, do you feel any different now that you're a published author sitting in class as a student at your age compared to, say, before you had your book? Do you have a different insight on the world now that you're an author?
Well, I think the biggest change is just my English teachers are quite jealous of me with the fact that they haven't actually published anything yet. So, but apart from that, I feel like it hasn't really changed a great deal because at least in the UK, there isn't really that much of an emphasis on creative writing in English. So it feels like it doesn't make that much of a difference. It's more on the side of just analyzing texts and reading examples of pre-written work. But one thing I do think has changed with regards to that is I think I'm a lot more critical of these more historical texts now. I am, because I've seen the process of writing things and I've done it myself. I think it's made me more critical of other books, and I think it's harder for me to just sort of shut my brain off when I'm reading them because I pay more attention to the small details because that's what I needed to do for my book.
So it's almost like a movie director going to the movies for fun, but then just trying to pick apart the camera angles and the plot and the arc and, I would have filmed it this way, I would have done it that way. You're kind of looking at books and literary pieces with a little different lens now that you have your own book.
Yeah, because with a book, all the details are just on the page, so it's a lot easier to just zoom in on specific things, and you'll be like, oh, that's like awkwardly written, or I don't like how they've structured this chapter or whatever. So yeah, but I feel like the average person wouldn't zoom in on those things. They just focus on the more entertainment value side of it. So yeah, I think that it has made me sort of, like, it hasn't made me love writing any less. It's just made me more critical, I think, of other people's works.
So, Dylan, I haven't written a book ever. So you have far surpassed me in life as far as being an author. Where did you start with the how part of writing a book? How did you do research? Did you find somebody who gave you the wisdom and knowledge to do what you're doing? Like, how did you start?
I knew that I wanted to do fantasy for my first books, so that helped me a lot, because I've always loved, like, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. I've loved all of those types of stories. So I was set on the idea of doing fantasy. I think I was reading A Song of Ice and Fire, like the books that inspire Game of Thrones, while I was writing it. So that definitely played a big part in how it turned out. I think the first thing I did was sort of make a plot outline. Like I made like the appendix in the back of the book listing all the characters. I think that was the first thing that I made, just to have an idea of who's who and what basic role I wanted each character to play. And then I went into the chapter outline, like giving myself a really brief, very loose outline of the plot, because it ended up changing a lot by the end. And and then after that, I just go with the first chapter that you want to write your first draft, see how it goes, go to your next one, draft it, and then go back to the beginning, read it all again, just to make sure that you haven't like generated any plot holes or anything. And yeah, that was just my process, and that took about a year probably.
Writing a book, again, like I was mentioning, for me, I don't have a book. I'm not an author, and I'm always astounded and amazed at how you can create something from nothing. So you have a blank piece of paper, you have a blank screen on your computer, and you have to build a whole world around your book. You have to build a world around what you're writing. And then for me, the other thing I find fascinating from an author's perspective is you're creating a story arc. Can you explain to me how you approach writing and building an arc in a story and building like a whole world around your characters? Because you're the designer, you're the creator of this book. So you can make this be as crazy or as normal as possible. You have complete control. Tell me how you approach building a world around this book.
Okay, so the first tip that I would say to anybody that wants to write any sort of book that involves world building, do the world building before you do the story, because the world building will completely influence the story. And the way to do world building is sort of do it kind of like a camera, I guess. Zoom out first and then start zooming in, get more specific with the details as you go further in. The first kind of things you should sort of outline with a book are what's the setting called? If it's like on a grander scale with like a planet or something, what are like the cities, what are the continents, and then like the sort of more geographical aspects of it, and any laws that you want to follow with it. So for example, if there's magic or like mythical creatures or something, then go into more specific details. Like, for example, if you're doing like a dystopia, you might want to talk about like some shady business that you want that has like a lot of power over a city. Or if you're doing fantasy, you might want to go into details about the more influential characters like the king, the queen, etc. But then as well as that, you want to look at maybe make a bestiary, with, the creatures and if they're like insects or pets, whatever. Make like a record of key characters that you want to mention, and you could make like a mythopedia, I think it's called, where you sort of outline the mythology or the religions. But yeah, the best thing to do is, with world building, is start on a grander scale and then start zooming in, go into more specifics, and do all of your notes beforehand, before you start writing, because you will most likely change a solid 40-50% of it, if not more. But the best thing to do is have that initial idea, see how it goes. If you need to change it, or you feel like you need to change, it needs to change for the story to work, then do that. And then with story arcs, you need to do the story arcs after you do the world building, because of the impact that the world is going to have on how the story is shaped. There are a lot of stories, for example, Star Wars, the whole story with the Skywalkers in Star Wars wouldn't be the same if they didn't have the world building with like the Force and things like that. Those have massive influences on how the story plays out, because if you take them out, then the story wouldn't be exactly the same. Actually, it wouldn't be the same at all. And with a book like Noble Betrayed, my one, of course, my chapters are organized with points of view, so it was a lot easier for me to map out the story arcs because I'd picked which characters I wanted to focus on, and then it's just about deciding what I want to do with them and how I want to sort of pace the chapters, which for that you should mostly just write. You shouldn't really determine the pacing beforehand. You should just write the first chapter for them until you get to a point where you think that's good for one chapter worth of stuff on them, and then do the second, do the third, and then if the pacing feels off, you can go back and edit things. If you have issues determining a story arc with any form of speculative fiction, so like fantasy, sci-fi, etc., the best thing to do is look at real world issues or news stories, because Earth has had some very interesting stories. You can even look at similar characters. Like, for example, my protagonist's name is Simon, and he's very similar to characters like Ned Stark, Geralt of Rivia, characters like those. It's fine to take inspiration, because stories have always taken inspiration from others and just refine them. Even with like Shakespeare plays, I'm studying Othello right now, and Othello wasn't original. It was based on a different play. I can't remember who that was by. And then Macbeth as well, that was inspired by historical events, although it's slightly changed because he wanted to appease the king, and following the historical events wouldn't have done that. It's fine to take inspiration. It doesn't make your story less original, because you don't have to follow it exactly. If you play with it and experiment as much as you can, then that's the best way to make a good story.
What I love about that too, Dylan, thinking about what you just said, is yes, there might be some similarities to some of your characters to another story, but you're writing through your eyes and your lived experience and who you are, and nobody can copy that. Nobody can be you. Only you can be you, and only you can write the way you write. So yeah, even though your characters kind of share a little bit, they're not the same character, because you're different than the author that wrote the others. That's a great point, Daryl. Really smart.
Unless you write it exactly the same, which is very unlikely. Yeah. It's very unlikely that you're going to make exactly the same character.
So if you had a podcast, Dylan, or a show or an interview opportunity, what author, living or dead, would you love to sit down with for like an hour and just grill them with questions and just learn from them? Is there somebody that really inspires you?
That's a great question. I think that I would go with, if I wanted to focus on fantasy, I would go with probably George R.R. Martin, because I think his style of writing is a lot closer to what became of Noble rather than J.R.R. Tolkien, although he's another one that I would love to talk to. But yeah, I think, George R.R. Martin, because I'd like to sort of discuss, I mean, the Song of Ice and Fire series is so big. There's so much detail in it, and I mean, with the fact that it's taken him 10 years so far already to write the next book, I don't think that is 100% procrastinating like some people say it is, sort of capitalizing on the success of the show and everything. I do think it is partly because he's made such a vast world that every single line of every single line he writes can impact tons of characters that he has created, and it can cause tons of plot holes. He needs to go back and check everything. So, and I know that I could definitely get to that at some point. Yeah, so I know that I could eventually get to that at some point, so I would like some advice on how to handle that. But then, if I didn't have to go with fantasy, I'd probably go with Frank Herbert, the writer of Dune, because that was written back in 1965. That was one of the first novels about science fiction. And it is a lot smaller scale than a lot of science fiction nowadays, but I think that is the sort of thing I would go for if I ever decided to write science fiction. So I do think that a talk with him would be very interesting. Additionally, the fact that it was so innovative for the time. I would eventually love to write something that feels very experimental, because that's just something I love to do. I love to experiment.
Was there any point in writing your book, Dylan, where you got to the point where you're like, I don't think I can take my character in this direction. I don't think this is possible. But you kind of wrote through that and you continued, and something happened in the book kind of opened up for you in front of you? Was there any part where you kind of got a little stuck?
Yeah, so I was referring to this when I said that you're going to rework your like basic outlines 1,000 times. There is one, I won't name the character, but there is one specific character that I was planning on having in, because I'm planning on making Noble a series. I was planning on having them for future editions, like future installments. But I realized that the best thing to do with the character was to kill them off at the end. And because then it would have because I realized that through the death of that character, it was going to empower another character to become far better than that character ever was.
So that character was kind of in the shadow of the one you're thinking about killing off, possibly?
Yeah, and the character that's still alive has now more or less absorbed the role that I was going to give the other one. But I think as a result, I've transformed that character into a far better one. And that's just an example. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've completely changed how I've wanted to do some aspects of the plot at some times. Even things like the world building, I've completely changed like the origin of the world like 3 times at least. I think I finally settled on it now, but
yeah. That's okay. So when did you, this is something I'm curious about. When did you realize you were writing a series compared to writing a single book?
When I got to the point where I realized that it was probably going to be at least 400 pages long. Now it's 460 pages, just the first one. And I realized that there was, unless I wrote a 1,000 page book, which isn't something that appeals to me, and I don't think it would appeal much to a reader either. It just got to a point where I felt like, okay, I need to do another one if I really want to tell this story in a proper way, and also in a way that readers would be most satisfied, I think. Because most people, when they see, I remember Aragon was the classic one in primary school. Whenever someone sees a massive book, they get intimidated by it and they put it down. It's still, Noble Betrayed is still really big, but it's not as big as it could have been if I put everything together in one. So I think it is a lot better to just separate it into volumes at a point where you think it's a good point to cut off.
Is there an audio version of the book in the works in the future? Do you think you're going to go down that path?
Yeah, I would like to. There isn't one at the moment, but it is something I would be interested in doing. The only problem with something like this is that because there are so many points of view, it is one of those things where I'd rather sort of get a cast rather than just have one person reading it. Because you've got characters who are in the 50s, and then you've got characters who are like 9 years old, I think is my youngest one. So I think that a cast would be better for to sort of experience it properly.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. That becomes like a real theater of your mind as you listen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You might say, and then the character walked to the top of the hill, and there was a large building. And that's it. You don't say anything. But in my mind, I create my own world of what the hill is, what color the building is it nighttime, daytime? I'm adding to your story in my mind as I'm listening to it or as I'm reading, right? Because I see the world differently than you do, even as the author. I add my own world into your world and try to make it relate to me and my experiences. So I might see your book in a different light than you even intended as the author, which is unique. I'm a musician, and I know you do music as well. And like, I'll write a song and somebody will hear a lyric or experience in a way that I had no idea. I wasn't even thinking about that. And they're like, yeah, I love when you said this in your song. And I'm like, I did. But they
yeah,
picked out something that
happened,
means to them, right?
Yeah. That happened with, this isn't novel, but I remember, there was this short story I wrote of mine, and I showed it to one of my tutors. It was in English, so it felt fitting to show it to them. And in the story, a mop is used as a weapon, I think. And he was talking about how it could be seen as a symbol of like cleaning up the streets and something like that. And I just did it for the sake because he already had a mop, so I felt like it was a good opportunity to use it for something else.
And you're like, wow, okay, yeah, that's really unique.
I'm an absolute genius. I totally thought of that.
So Dylan, if there's somebody listening to our conversation today and they haven't started writing, and maybe they're young, and maybe they feel like they're too young to be doing this. This is something that adults do. People in their, like you said, their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Those are authors. Kind of, they smell funny and they're old and, they've had a long life and then they become an author. I'm a new author. I'm 15, 16 years of age. Am I too young, Dylan, to write my first book? What would you say to them?
The best thing to do is, even if it does turn out like mediocre or even just bad when you're writing at 15 or 16, the point is the learning curve. So even if you don't end up happy with what you write, or if you publish it and it doesn't turn out as well as you expected, it is a lot better to start at 15 and continue writing for however long you want and slowly get better and better than start writing at the age of like 50 or 60 because that's what you were expecting. That was the age you were expecting to start writing at. And because even then it could still turn out bad. It's better to have practice. Being, I don't know, 65 or whatever doesn't guarantee that you're going to have the knowledge required to write a book because the idea isn't all that goes into it. It's more than that. It's about the craft. It's about creativity. It's about figurative language, whatever. Your ability to craft story arcs and worlds and exciting plot structures and things like that. It's a lot better to start now than, become equally disappointed as you are now 50 years later.
Did you write yourself into your book? Like, is there a character that really resembles you as a person, or are there elements of you kind of scattered throughout the cast of your book?
Yeah, there isn't really one character that completely embodies me, but I do feel like there are aspects of some of them that do feel like me. There are some characters that sort of reflect the there is one character that reflects a sort of nerdier side of me. He's interested in their fantasy version of like D&D, I guess, or like chess. Yeah. He's more interested in those things than sort of blood and guts and everything else, and like politics. But then I do like politics as well, so I do think that even with the political side or the cunning politicians, I do think they sort of embody me as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Because humans are very complex. There are a lot of things that you can relate to.
So when you're writing,
so
Dylan,
even in some characters...
Yeah.
Even in some characters that feel like polar opposites to you, there could still be something that you admire or relate to.
I like that too. I like that you added the polar opposite. I didn't even think of that. That's really smart. Did you, when you're writing, did you have a chance to to hide something in the story that made you smile or made you excited, and you can't wait for your reader to get to that chapter and that page and go, oh my gosh, oh wow, like, and you're writing it going, oh, I can't wait for somebody to read this. Did you hide stuff like that in the book?
Yeah, there are two of those, but I can't say I.
You don't have to give it away. You don't have to tell anybody, but you did do that, right?
But
how does that feel?
One of them comes literally out of nowhere. I remember I let my mom read my first draft of that chapter, and she was just she was just in complete shock. She wasn't expecting it at all, because it just comes out of nowhere.
Nice.
And then the second moment is the last chapter, so I'm not going to say much about that.
I love that. So, because like, if it's in, say, chapter 5, and your friend or family's in chapter 4, and they're like, I just don't understand this story. But you're like, wait till chapter 5. You'll know. You'll understand. Because right? So you kind of like have the inside secret that no one knows. So that must be fun for you as a writer.
Yeah, I have inside jokes sort of laid out there in the book as well. I've got a decent amount of characters that I named after my teachers, and that was sort of the hook for my that was sort of the hook for my friends, because they just think it's hilarious that there are characters named after my teachers taking on roles that would fit like their teaching job. Like my like RE teachers, they're all like in priest or priestess like characters. The English teachers are all like storytellers and things like that. But yeah, they all still have they're characters with their own stories. They aren't just gimmick characters. I just also gave them those names just to sort of be an homage to the teachers, because they've been like great inspirations.
Nice little tip of the hat to them. That's nice. Any response from teachers about them appearing in your writings?
Yeah, I remember one of my current English teachers. I don't think he's finished reading it yet, because obviously they're very busy, so it's fine. But he read through the like list of characters, and he was noticing all of the things in common. And one of the teachers that has a character named after him is a teacher that has now left the school, and he ended up contacting him to tell him, just to let him know. So yeah, they're all aware. That's probably not a great thing in all aspects, because some of the characters do die, but
that's really, I love
that. When I first announced the publication of my book to the school, I think about 20 teachers that I'd had over the years ended up purchasing it straight away.
So take me back really nice. To the day, Dylan, when your book arrived on your doorstep in the mail. You open the box and you put your hands on the book for the very first time. Like, it's gone from something in your head, in your heart, through your computer, through a pen, to physically being in your hand, the final copy. What does that feel like for you?
I was at school when it arrived, and my dad was picking me up that day, and he kept it in the parcel that it came in. So I was already like full of like the adrenaline of being at school, and then I got into the car. He gives me a parcel, and then I open it, and it's right there, and I'm just like, like, this is life changing. This is amazing. Yeah.
So again, Dylan, I'm not an author. I just get the chance to talk to amazing authors, and I'm living through you in that moment, because I think there's so much pride and so much love, and you really care about what you're writing. It's not like you're just writing a book because you're bored. You have something to say, and you have something to give to the world. And by writing, you're doing that, and you're helping people, and you're entertaining people. And again, you're just putting something out into the world, and you never know where it's going to go, and whose desk or whose home this book is going to be in, and who's going to read this. It's quite unique and exciting to see you as an author create something like this. Your family must be proud, and your friends must be confused, and all of that happening at the same time. What have you learned about yourself in this whole process from day one of I want to write a book to being here with me chatting now? What have you learned about yourself? Like how have you changed? How have you grown?
I think that the main thing that writing this book has done for me is I think it's just really helped me work out who I am. I think it's sort of helped me, this is taking a quote from a poem by John Agard, but it's helped me carve out my own identity, I think. And I think that if I hadn't written it, I think I would still be in extreme doubt about what I want to do in the future. And I think now that I've actually had more experience with it, I think that I'm a lot more certain about how I want my life to carry on, I guess. And it's also opened me up to a lot of opportunities. I've spoken at a literary festival now. So standing in front of like a huge crowd speaking. It was the AIM Literary Festival. And, I remember, I posted it on my Instagram, like a snippet of my speech. And then later I went on a call with one of my friends and he just said, "How come you're a celebrity now?" And it was just, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it's completely changed my life at this point. Although it doesn't feel different when because I'm still sort of doing the same things I was before. But then when I do all these events that I've been asked to do, that's when it hits me that things are never really going to be the same.
And then some guy in Canada wants you to come on his podcast and talk about your book. And
yeah.
like, this is really weird. Like, my friends are playing video games or they're doing something else. And here I am talking about a book that I wrote. Like, it's unique, Dylan. It's very unique for, again, I don't want to always say
I think
somebody your age, but it's great.
Yeah, I think another thing that's sort of opened my eyes to the scope of it is on Amazon you can see where the sales are coming from. I've got sales in America, I've got sales in Canada, I've got sales in Australia, Brazil, Spain, it's Germany, I think. It's like, yeah, all over the world, countries I've never even been to.
Your book is going places you haven't been yet, which is
no.
But in a way, if you think about it this way, your book is opening the doors to these countries, and you never know who's going to call, right? And say, "Hey, Dylan, I need you to come to Canada and talk about your book." Okay, Mom, Dad, I got to go to Canada. I got a speaking engagement. So your book is kind of getting out there for you, and it's like a business card, really, which is
it is,
which is amazing. So I love that it's opening doors for you.
I would love to do a lot of travel. It's just not really feasible right now because of school and everything. But in maybe after university, I would do a ton of travel if I had to. Yeah. Even though Australia is obviously the other corner of the world, but it would be cool to go there at some point.
So I have a lot of Australian authors that have been on the podcast. So we'll put a word out to them and you can come stay at their home or, they're fellow authors and they would love to meet you and share in your story. It's awesome. So Dylan, before we go, can you just give us just an idea? If I was on the website, if I was ready to buy this book and I'm ready to hit click and I'm going to buy it, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to like this book. What would you say to a person who's thinking about purchasing the book today? What can you say as the author that would make them go, yeah, I'm going to buy this book? Okay,
so the book may be fantasy, but it's also very real. And that's something that I've said a ton. Because even there are a couple mythical creatures and things like that. One of the first chapters is a character finding a baby griffin, and we watch the griffin's growth during the book. And so there are elements of mystical, more stereotypical fantasy elements. But then the main storyline that drives the plot is it revolves around domestic abuse and real world issues. One of the characters is deaf. There are characters that explore women's rights and things like that, and political intrigue and regicide and things like that. Although regicide doesn't necessarily happen, but there are real world issues explored. It's not just sort of turn your brain off fantasy, explore like a mystical world with magic and everything. There is magic does exist, but it's in it's in doses. There aren't any like wizard characters or anything. It's more of like it's done in small amounts. I don't really revolve anything around magic. There are no like plot elements revolving around magic or anything. So yeah, I think that's what I would focus on. The fact that even though it's fantasy, it will still explore real world issues and the best way to respond to them, I guess.
So Dylan, you mentioned Instagram and a clip to your speech. Is Instagram the place where people will find you the most online?
Yeah, it's the place where I'm the most active. I'm trying to become more active on Twitter though, but okay. Yeah, so should I say my Instagram?
Yeah, I would love to share that. Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
Yeah, my Instagram handle is lbrennan51. Actually, lbrennan51 is my handle on more or less everything. So yeah, that's the best place to find me.
Good. And then as far as the book itself, is it available everywhere then?
It's available exclusively on Amazon, but in, lots of countries. I think it's mostly like Europe and America where you'll 100% find it on Amazon. Okay. Just search Novel Betrayed on the Amazon website and it will most likely be there.
Beautiful. So what would you like to close off with, Dylan?
I think I would like to close it off with, so there were two quotes that I said during the speech that I made at the AIM Literary Festival that I mentioned earlier. The first one was a quote from Maya Angelou, which was, I said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And then the second one was a quote I made myself while I was drafting it, where I said, "Open your ear to your heart and watch it sing." And I think, those are the quotes I'd like to leave everyone with, just to motivate them to start writing.
Dylan, those are two amazing quotes that we can't just pass over. And people are listening to us right now in their car. They're at the gym running on the treadmill. They're in the kitchen making food. You got to say those quotes again, Dylan, because they're so powerful. Can you do them again, please?
Okay. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And open your ear to your heart and watch it sing.
I think I have the title of our podcast right there. That's amazing, Dylan. I don't want to always like focus on the young part of you being a young author. I want to focus on the fact that you are an accomplished author. You are thoughtful. You really care about what you're doing and what you're offering to the world. And in a world, Dylan, where you could be doing 1,000 other things with your life, sometimes wasting time pursuing things that don't really feed your soul, you're writing and you're creating something for the world and expressing yourself. I hope that people listening see past the age and the number for you and how old you are, but see who you are as a person, because you are somebody that is so inspirational and encouraging. You're so well grounded. I would love to congratulate your family, your parents, your teachers, because they've all poured into you, and you are kind of the result of all their stories kind of mixed together, really, right? But if we could just set aside your age for a second, Dylan, you are so inspiring to talk to. And I want you to hear that and understand that you are making an impact on people. So don't stop. Keep writing. I can't wait to see how these books kind of grow and morph and the characters change and all of that. The world you're creating, I can't wait to see that and just grow and expand. And I'm cheering you on from Canada. So I'm doing that to say keep going, Dylan, and don't ever stop, because you have a gift.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So everyone, we'll put links to the show notes to all of Dylan's stuff. Even the clip, I want to do a link to that in the show notes so you can hear Dylan speak in front of a crowd, which is amazing. Dylan, thank you so much for being on Living the Next Chapter. And please keep us in mind for the future when next books come out. I'd love to have you come back. It'd be great. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Again, thank you for subscribing and following. And you're listening this far in the podcast, so you are my best friend. I'm sorry, but you are now my best friend. So welcome. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. LivingTheNextChapter.com has a link on the website to our Facebook group. Are you on Facebook? Probably. You can go there and you can actually interact with our guests. You can talk to them. You can hear more about their journey, about their books. You can speak to them directly. You don't need me. You can come right over to livingthenextchapter.com, click on our Facebook, link to our community. You can talk to other listeners of the podcast from around the world who are on Facebook. And, again, speak with our guests. Don't you want to speak to the guests you just heard from? Yeah, you can do that on Living the Next Chapter. Go over there. There's links to our Facebook group, and you're welcome to join. Thanks for listening.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.